Welcome to the Phoenix Conversations, second chances, fresh starts and powerful new chapters. I'm Lucy McCarraher, author, speaker and entrepreneur, and each week I talk to men and women who've lived through turning points and come out brighter on the other side. Whether this is the first time you've listened to this podcast or you're a regular listener, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit follow and subscribe. Today I'm talking to Dani Wallace, motivational speaker, performer, mentor and businesswoman. Through Dani's world-renowned business and life development event, The Big Festoon, she has helped thousands of people to release the fear of speaking in public, take inspired action, break down barriers, unite communities and step into their birthright of success. This conversation, though, goes back to Dani's childhood, which looked outwardly happy and secure, but was darker behind the scenes. Dani created coping mechanisms which in part have been instrumental to her adult success and in part have kept her trapped in patterns of painful behaviour and toxic relationships. The revelations and growth points that Dani has worked through to free herself for bigger and better things are moving and inspiring. Hello, Dani. Thank you for joining me on the Phoenix Conversations. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. So how are you? How are you today?
I'm great. And Lucy, thank you so much for having me. It was so wonderful to be asked to come onto this podcast. And you and I kind of talked offline that it's very, very relevant, this conversation, to the things that are happening in my world right now. So I'm excited to talk today.
Well, Dani, I always like to kind of start at the beginning. So I'm going to ask you what Dani was like as a child, as a little girl, how you grew up, what your environment was like, because I think that's always relevant to subsequent reinventions and life events.
Yeah, it really is. And something that I've done a lot of reflection on in terms of the work that I do as well. So if I go back to where I grew up in the very early 80s on the council estates of Preston, and our family were very working class, and things like domestic abuse and imbalanced intimate partner relationships, addiction and things like that were just part of the fabric of how we grew up. The information that I got in terms of how I move in the world, how I think about money, for example, my work ethic, all really stem from being a little girl and observing everybody around me. Everybody around me worked very, very hard. A lot of people's validation was centered in how hard they worked. Didn't really matter how good they were to their partners or their kids or anything like that. But as long as they worked hard, they were considered to be good people, I guess. And our house was a very busy house. My mum had lots of siblings. Those siblings had lots of children. And because of, again, how we grew up, our house ended up being a bit of a revolving door for the cousins that came to live with us. And as such, my sister and I ended up with lots of pseudo siblings. So young Dani, little Dani, was very much the youngest of all of those and had to be entertaining. Had to, in order to be heard, I found that, speaking and being funny and singing were ways that I kind of got attention.
What happened? When did you kind of leave the family environment then?
Well, when I was 16, because again, things were very kind of chaotic indoors. Now, to the outside world, they didn't look so. Our family looked very stable, very 2.4 children. Yes, my mum and dad looked after a lot of their cousins, but my dad was quite a figurehead on the estate in that he ran the local butcher's shop. Now, I don't know if the listeners out there may recognise this, but on the council estates, there would often be a row of shops. And those shops were essentially kind of the hub of that particular area. So there'd be a greengrocer's, a butcher's, a hairdresser's, a newsagent's, post office, and so on. So my dad had the butcher's shop. And as such, he was very affable and was a real upstanding member of the community outwardly, and became a local politician. He did lots of great work, and indoors it wasn't the case. So we got a very, very different version of my dad. And so by the time I got to 16, I could not wait to essentially, Lucy, run away with the circus. And when I say run away with the circus, what I actually mean is I was able to go and work abroad. People like us, people like me, wouldn't necessarily be able to afford the kind of travel that I felt in my bones that I wanted to do. So why not get paid to travel? So I auditioned and ended up working for lots of holiday companies and cruise ships and resorts all over the world singing. So using that performance, that, that kind of inherent talent that I had from being very little, which was honed by my primary school teacher, who noticed that I was a little bit disruptive, but very intelligent, but had this like skill, this talent. And she called my mum and she said, Daniela is really going to need singing lessons. And my mum was like, well, I can't afford it. So they had an agreement between them where my mum would pay a nominal fee and my primary school teacher would teach me the basics of music. And by the time I got to 16, I was kind of ready to not learn more about it, go and do it. And that's what I did. So left the family home at 16 to go and pursue singing, which wasn't considered a proper job, Lucy.
No, I can imagine, particularly kind of coming from that background of what, where hard work looked like a particular thing. And I can imagine that singing, which was your kind of part of your role within the family in a way, and not the kind of outside work that you were supposed to be doing, looked like. So I guess that was for you something of a reinvention then, to take that gift that you must have known that you had, because you have an amazing voice. I've heard you sing, and decide that could be work, and actually go and find work abroad. That really must have been a very big step for a 16-year-old from where you were from.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, unless I was essentially ordained by Simon Cowell, because it was very much of the era of pop stars and then Britain's Got Talent and X Factor. And, the only way to really make it, being somebody like me, was to, have been on one of those programs. And that's something that, because I had attempted but never really quite gotten through and broken through, it wasn't really taken seriously. So a lot of my family, a lot of my friends, a lot of my community thought I was going away and I was on my holidays and I was having a lovely time. And actually being in the entertainment industry abroad on your own, being very young, was real hard work. And so it wasn't at home considered a proper job. And a lot of my family and the people closest to me wanted me to do it, but they didn't really want me to do it. It was, I think, a real brave move. If I look back at younger Dani, it was a real brave move for a kid so young. But I was also hell-bent on leaving the situation. I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. It didn't feel nice. I remember being very young and my sister and I were listening to the adults arguing downstairs. We turned the TV up, said to each other at the time, you know what, when we grow up, I hope that we're able to help in some way, shape or form young people or families not experience this. Really interesting and very conscious conversation that two young sisters have. There's lots of real full circle moments that come back to that moment as well. That information and that experience has informed a lot of the decisions that both my sister and I have made as we've gotten older. So the first thing was to break away from it. But then after, years of traveling, is to come back and get a proper job, or at least a more conventional job, which is essentially what I did. So the first kind of reinvention wasn't a comfortable one, because it felt like I wasn't really living my truth. I came back to work in offices. I came to work in corporate. But very quickly, Lucy, I swapped a stage for a stage, because I ended up working in learning and development. I ended up training. I ended up speaking. And so performance became performance elsewhere, which is really funny how that really quickly came back around.
That's so interesting, because I tend to see, when I'm talking to people, often there's a golden thread that runs through their lives that they haven't really noticed before. I mean, you probably have, but it seems to me that as you talk about kind of going into corporate and training and helping other people, that there's a dual kind of thread here where you can see that your ability to entertain and lighten can actually go into that. I mean, I think that's a very mature kind of attitude that you and your sister were taking when you were young and in that, presumably quite traumatic situation, that you wanted in the future to help other people in that situation, but that you've intertwined that ability to entertain and lighten life with the very strong desire to make life better for people too. So I'm guessing that is what's linking all these things together. So tell me how you got out of, kind of cruise ship or whatever, entertainment, and went into corporate. That seems a big reinvention in itself.
Yeah, and it didn't really feel like it at the time. So this happened in the early noughties at the rise of the contact centre, like as we know it or knew it certainly back then. And Preston, the city that I live in, and I'm like a bad penny. I just keep coming back to Preston because I'm like 2 hours away from everywhere. It's great. Everyone's, why do you still live in Preston? It's because A, my roots are here and my mum lives here, but also I'm 2 hours from London. I'm an hour from Manchester. So I came back to Preston, and Preston was an industrial city. We were, because of where we were, like on the River Ribble, on the, the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, all of this sort of stuff. A lot of industry, particularly the cotton industry and the fabric industry, was centred here. So we have lots and lots of mills, which is perfect for this contact centre environment, which at the time was the factories of then, right? So this is where, mass industry was taking place. It just happened in a more technological fashion, in a much more kind of static way on the phones. So in between contracts, I would always, the work ethic that mum and dad instilled in us from being a very young age was you can go from a job to a job, always have a job lined up if you're going somewhere else. So I would work for maybe 6, 8, 9 months on a contract and then come back to an agency and get work at a contact centre because I was affable, I'm articulate, I'm friendly, customer service. Being in entertainment is absolutely at the forefront of everything that I do. So it made sense. It was very easy for me to get jobs in contact centres. And the Carphone warehouse at the time was really taking off. It was the birth of mass mobile phone ownership. Everybody had one. It was the birth of the Apple iPhone around that time. And it was such a boom for that particular company. And so they were in massive and rapid growth. So I started just on the phones and customer service, but very quickly talent managed, because it's easier to move someone through than it is to recruit in. Because they were on such a recruitment drive, they were trying to talent manage up very quickly. And so I moved really quickly into learning and development and got some of the best, most world-class training that I could never have got at university. Having it from the best of a company that is being so heavily invested in, that is doing so well from a profitability perspective, right at the cutting edge of what's relevant right now. I was learning personality profiling, leadership training, sales skills, customer service skills. I wasn't even having to pay for it. I was getting paid to do it and being paid really well. So I tripped and fell into training. And then as things have gone on, and I know as we meander through our conversation, actually, the performance and the training skills is what actually brings me to where I am now. So yeah, that was the jump, but it wasn't as far of a jump as what you might think.
Yes, of course. Sometimes reinvention is something major happens. You have to make a big change, and it's very conscious and it's usually very painful as well. But other times things change and it seems organic to you, but actually when you look back, you see it was actually quite a big change. So you had one of what might have seemed like a temporary job in a contact centre, but you never went back to the old entertainment work after that. So what happened? How long did you stay in corporate, shall we say?
So in corporate, I was in there about 15 years. And the thing that is very interestingly, and if you, like earlier on in our conversation, I was talking about, your work ethic being your defining factor, and actually what's happening underneath we don't talk about that. That's not something that happens. Actually, what I found was that this trajectory that I was on from a career perspective, to the outsider looking in, Danielle is doing really well. She's got a great job and all of this sort of stuff. But if I look just underneath the surface, my intimate partner relationships were in a pretty sorry state. I really sought validation through, whether I was in a relationship or not. So it didn't really matter what kind of a relationship was. As long as somebody loved me, I'd be okay. And so things took quite a dark turn in tandem with that career progression, in tandem with those great things where I could focus and could look at it now, where I could control, where I could perform, where I could achieve. It was very easy for me to do that in the workplace, whereas actually behind closed doors in my home, things weren't like that at all. The first sort of partner that I'd had where it was serious, there was just a husband-shaped hole because it was the right thing to do. And I filled it with the first person that didn't hit me, because obviously that was my experience and it wasn't for him. So I had the dream job, just had a baby, we'd booked and paid for the wedding. And he woke up one morning and he just went, I don't want any of this. Then we're just under 3 months out and lost all of the money on the wedding. I'm stuck there now. I'm this single mum of this very, very young baby, really having had the rug pulled out from under her. And it was because if I think about it now, because of that pattern of behaviour of seeking validation through my intimate partner relationship to the outsider looking in, it was a shock to everybody. But when I look at it, it wasn't, because he wasn't the right guy for me. I just wanted someone to love me, and that left me in quite a vulnerable spot. And so very quickly, I got into another relationship that didn't, that didn't serve me in the slightest. And this person was very aware that I was very vulnerable, and it was quite predatory behaviour, and experienced very quickly domestic abuse and then homelessness directly. So it went, the two trajectories kind of do this. And all of a sudden, the two were so misaligned that I couldn't help but fall off a cliff and ended up in a position with the 2 young children at the time, ended up homeless. Everything else had been a jump, and that was a real crash.
Wow, Dani, that must have been incredibly tough. I see that you've actually kind of accidentally replicated what you had at home as a child, because again, the work was good, the validation from the outside, the jobs, the status was all looking great, and under the surface there was not great things happening in relationships, and pain for you and your siblings.
Absolutely. And I think some of that centres in this, do I even deserve this? Is this something that I deserve? Because if I observe everybody's behaviours, their relationships as I was growing up, the women particularly within those relationships had to do the majority, if not all, of the emotional labour. The men particularly were drinkers, or were violent, or had their own trauma. Because back then they didn't have the language that, say, we have now, where even having this conversation, Lucy, is a reflective piece that lots and lots of people, particularly back from that point in time, just didn't have the language. So these men were often traumatized, and so were the women, but the women would carry the emotional labour. And of course, then the cycle perpetuates and you don't realise it. You think, why is this happening to me? I don't know how else to be. I didn't have any other information. There was no other. It's a terrible thing to say. And people get, I guess, almost upset when I share with them. There was not one good man around me when I was growing up, not one good man. And that's frightening, really.
Yeah, it is. And very difficult to move away from as you grow older. So Dani, you became homeless. You had 2 small children. How did you climb out of that particular crash?
What I'd realised through having access for the first time to personal development, and I know, like, for a lot of people, this is often pivotal, but you can only really do this kind of self-awareness work or that kind of learning when you're ready to receive it. And many people in the past, you need to read this book, or you need to think about things like this, or have you come across Tony Robbins, for example? And I just wasn't ready. And I remember being sat in my car, and it was, I'd just kissed the kids goodbye or goodnight. I was in the car. It was like a scene out of a really bad 80s movie. It was raining outside. I was about to head off to London to go and work out of London. We were sofa surfing between my mum's and my sister's and my friend's house. And I was like, I'm no use to anyone. I can't make a good decision. It doesn't feel like, I don't feel like I can make a good decision. And I kind of had a realisation in that moment that I was actually complicit in every single decision I've made so far. I was participating in every single thing that I was doing. And I just was an inactive participant because I wasn't choosing, I was allowing. And actually, what if instead of life happening to me, I was to happen to life? What if the next decision I make for future me, and not just the me in front of my nose that is going to make me comfortable or just have me survive? And so that really started a period of learning, of trying to sit with the mirror very uncomfortably, doing things that I'd never done before, like ask for help, for example, not hide from my money troubles, for example, allow people to help me, which is something that even to this day is something that I sit with and struggle to do, but allow more now, much to everybody's delight when I find myself in different positions now. But it was because I'd seen so many of the women in my life just get on with it. you realise that's really detrimental. And the moment that you allow somebody to help, or you go, please, can you help me? I'm really struggling, things start to move better. Then I, came out of corporate. That wasn't working for me anymore. It's a longer story, we'll talk about another time. But what I did is I started to choose myself. I started to choose, actually, what do I want to do? Well, I want to sing. The only place I sing anymore is in the shower or in the car. So I got a startup loan from the British Business Bank at the time. And they just started this startup loan kind of initiative, got a small PA equipment, got a small little runaround car, and started gigging on the circuit, and started to put my makeup on live streaming and telling people what I was getting up to and what my hopes were. And really that started the snowball to where we are today.
That's amazing. So, oh gosh, so it's really so much to kind of unpack there, because there's that moment in the car when you suddenly realize that you can be active in your own life, that it's not everybody else's fault. It's not just circumstance. You have to take action to change things. And I think those moments are so pivotal in reinvention. And as you say, if you don't have them yourself, nothing anybody else can tell you will make any difference until it comes from you, and you get that revelation. And then the actual steps you took were so brilliant. You took yourself into entrepreneurship and, got the loan, got the car, got the equipment, and went off and did it. And how long did it take for that to work, for you to earn a living out of that?
Well, it's really interesting, and I always come back to the fact that, I maintained that entrepreneurship saved my life. It gave me back autonomy. It gave me back autonomy over my finances, where I choose to work, how I work, what it is that I do for work, what is the skills exchange, all of that sort of stuff. That's not something that I think entrepreneurs forget sometimes, the reasons why we do what we do. And it kind of comes back to those things that for me, as a survivor of abuse in lots of different ways, I suddenly held the reins to it. I wasn't giving it away to anybody else. I was accountable for me. It began a trajectory of quite a lot of hyper independence, which might not necessarily be as healthy, but at that particular moment in time, it gave me back so much autonomy. And just like with everything else, I started to gig, and the joke here in the Northwest was that Dani Gallagher is my maiden name, is the hardest working woman in showbiz. Even though nobody knew who I was just a gigging singer, but I was gigging more than anybody else on the circuit. I wanted everybody to know, who I was, not because I wanted the fame of it. It's just I wanted to be the best in my particular craft, in the skill, in the field. And two things happened in tandem. One is that I found it very easy to get gigs. It was very easy to get booked. There were always people that were cancelling. The work was always there. It was just a treasure hunt for it. And I always found that then exciting. I would always find money. I could find it. It wasn't ever, oh, I've got no money, so I can't. It was, where do we get it? What lever do I pull? Where is it hiding? And the relationship with money started to change around then. Instead of it being, hey, I turn up to work and I get paid and that's it, there's a glass ceiling. It was, this is a treasure hunt. Okay, cool. Let's gamify this. Later on, find that I, of course, have ADHD, and gamification is brilliant for dopamine. And so it wasn't ever about making more and more money. It was about, how can I find these gigs? How can I share these gigs as well if I can't do it? And started to build a network of other artists and what have you. And in tandem with that, did multi-level marketing. And multi-level marketing, I was putting my makeup on live streams and telling people what it was that I was doing, and selling mascaras whilst I was doing it. So I'm gigging, I'm selling mascaras, I'm really wheeling and dealing. But people started to watch these live streams, Lucy, and not just interacting with me, but interacting with each other. And I'm doing lots of gigs. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday, and into the week. So these people are starting to connect with each other. And then I was like, right, let's get in rooms, shall we? Shall we meet up together? And really, that's when the events business started to take off, and the speaking, coaching and what have you.
Yes, I can see that's another sort of reinvention where you suddenly see there's community out there. And also it seems to me that that's where the thread of you starting to help other people comes into play. You are actually able to help other people get work, bring people together, presumably discuss issues.
Yeah.
And I also see that linking back. And one of the positives in your original family life of community. And I'm assuming that
Mm-hmm.
you were able to do this because you had a community of women who would, look after your children like they'd looked after your cousins when you were young, and that was
Yep.
all in place. And that was one of the we're probably able to find that as a real positive in your early life that had come through for you, and was also helping you to create communities that you knew needed to be there. But that feels like community is a big thing for you now, and that looks like the place where it
Mm-hmm.
came from.
Yeah, it did inherently, like as a part of my heart for sure. But also when I was growing up, because I was a little bit quirky, because I was a little bit different, I found it difficult to fit in just as me. Like without having to perform or without having to, be funny or take up space. And people would often have me, and still to this day, Lucy, would have me, and you and I have spoke about this, just out in the world when we've met before. People have me pegged as an extrovert, someone who is, loud or, very, very confident. And actually, it's quite the opposite. Yeah, I'm very much an introvert. It takes me a lot to save up my energy to then go and do an event, be an event. And then afterwards, I have to go and like settle and recharge. And spending that energy with other people it always felt very difficult because there was this expectation of me to be a certain way. And it isn't that I'm not that, it's that I'm so much more than that. But I was scared to be it. And so I wanted to create a community where I could just be myself and I could be silly and joyful and serious and clever and all of the dichotomies that I am, because I really struggled to find a space for that for myself when I was growing up. So the building of the community was really me trying to find somewhere where I fit in. And I thought, well, if I curate it, then I'm going to have to fit in because it's mine.
So where did you kind of take off from being almost, I suppose, informal kinds of communities and support
Hmm.
networks into being what you then started to create and where you've gone to today, which, like everything that you do, kind of has got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, do you know what? When you explain it like that, there's some work that I've been doing lately, Lucy, um, that really speaks to that. The work that I've done, yes, in a very short amount of time, really. The business that I run now has been going for 7 years. IATQB stands for I Am the Queen Bee. When I was homeless, I was watching the Bee movie, and there's this quote, Lucy, that aerodynamically bees shouldn't be able to fly, but their little wings shouldn't get their fat bodies off the ground, and the bee didn't get the memo, and the bee flies anyway. I'm paraphrasing. But I really love this idea of flying anyway, and I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to do, and that's, what I want to inspire people to do, is that regardless of where it is that they come from, regardless of their background, the colour of their skin, whether they've got tattoos, whether they're disabled, whatever, they get to fly anyway. We get to choose it because, with community, we all do well when we all do well. And that really captured the imagination. Me talking about that captured the imagination. So I did a little event, 50 people in Chorley down the road here in Preston. And literally I was like I wanted to create assets to prove to the world, coming out of corporate, that I was a good speaker, because I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to help people, but I had no proof. Because when you work in corporate, they don't video you when you're training people. And I was training like sometimes at conventions or at, big events. I was speaking to 5,000, 8,000 people. No proof. So I come back out into the world and I'm like, yeah, I'm a really good speaker. You should definitely book me for things. Well, send us your show reel. I don't have one. Well, we're going to need to see what it is that you do. So I curated my first event, the show at Rise Up Live, asked some of my friends to come and speak at it, did some swapsies with my videographer friends, photographer friends, and created these assets. Utilised that to build the corporate side of IATQB, where I go into corporates, train on leadership skills and communication, all the things that I taught, when I was in that space. And then on the other side of things, really started to look at, how do I help people communicate? Small businesses don't get access to that kind of training unless they go to an event. And also, it was an opportunity within these events to sing again. Like, I really love this idea of edutainment. And the kind of category of one for the events that we run now is that, as you know, there's lots going on. There's lots of really great value and really great learning, but there's also entertainment. It's like comic relief in the middle of everything. And that really started to, take people's imagination. But this inherent need for not necessarily validation, but there is this belief that sits within me, Lucy, or that sat within me until I've done lots of inside work, that if I wanted to reach everybody, that thought that I had with my sister back when we were 13 and 14 is, I don't want anybody to feel like this. And if I can just use my skills and my talents, I could reach them. I could, maybe make it a bit better for them. And what happens then is that if I could just be a bit more creative, if I could just do a bigger event, I can reach more people. If I could just give more of myself, then, I'm going to be able to reach people. And that started to play out again in my intimate partner relationship with my husband at the time, who was, inherently unhappy and really not capable of meeting me where I was at. But if only I could take, the pressure off him and, have him work with the business and take away, any of his need to do anything, then, I'm going to be able to make him happy. And I was never able to. So I'm overgiving up here within the event space, so much so that very quickly we ended up in an arena in March just gone. And then looking underneath it, it cost so much. And I don't just mean money, it cost a lot of money. But it cost me years in terms of a marriage that really I should have got out of sooner. It cost me months where I've not been able to spend it with my kids. It cost me friendships where they just didn't understand what it was that I was doing and why. And we kind of got to the end of March, and this trajectory, I can see where it's going. I really want to help people. And this realization in the same moment, I can't reach everybody. And now what then? And that, in the embers of this particular cycle, is do I even still want to do it? The answer is yes. But do I even still want to do it? And where do we go now? And that is both terrifying and exciting.
That sounds like a real kind of phoenix burnout that you've been through in the midst of everything going so positively and expanding and your business doing so well, that again, underneath it all, you are really, really going through the mill and suffering and losing out on things. But I think, again, it's that recognition. It's, you can go on living those dichotomies, as you say, for a long time until you get that revelation that you cannot continue and things will not go well if you don't change something. So what, Dani, what is the new place for you now? Where are you going forward to? Sounds very exciting.
It feels exciting. And do you know what? In the midst of certainly even the last 6 months, it's been terrifying as well. My sister, I don't know how you or, your listeners might feel about this, but I love tarot cards. I love oracle cards. I'm very much a woo and do kind of person. And my sister did me a card pull in October, and at the top of this card spread that she'd pulled was the Tower card. Now, if anybody understands tarot, the Tower card actually suggests the falling away. Now, that can be quite scary. That can be the falling away of everything. And looking at that as a very scary concept, because what I built still remains big. And the Tower card suggests the falling away of everything. Everything that got you or me to where I was aren't the things that are going to get me to where it is that I'm going, really sitting in my purpose, really, creating the things that I know that I'm here to create. And that actually in October called the question. These tarot cards are not about reading the future. It's about asking yourself the question and listening to the answer. Like what needs to fall away? What needs to come away in order to move through this next phase? And that really was the catalyst for that reflection. And one of the things that I managed to do was, because my now ex-husband is an internal processor and struggles with conversation, our entire marriage is on WhatsApp. Via messaging, in long prose of him trying to communicate with me and me desperately trying to communicate with this man. But what it meant is that I got 5 or 6 years worth of my patterns within a relationship, and how you deal with one thing is how you deal with lots of things. So I exported this WhatsApp and really analysed it and started to look at, where are my patterns here? How am I in this relationship? Because how I'm in this relationship is actually how I am in business. It's how I am within my friendships. And maybe that could give me some sort of a roadmap now with intention on how I move forward. So there's some things that I found out about myself in this dark night of the soul that actually provide me with a bit of a blueprint going forward. So where IATQB, where I'm going next, is I'm going to be speaking more for sure. I'm going to be at more events. I'm going to be there as me in all of the facets of the diamond and the dichotomies that is Dani. I'm not just a showgirl. That was how I was leading because it was easiest to get into the rooms that way. But what about the businesswoman? What about the mentor? What about the person who really understands psychology? What about the genius in me as well? I was too frightened to meet people in the first instance. I think, Lucy, when you and I met, I probably describe myself as an idiot when that's not the case. And so this next bit, but I serve it up first because then somebody can't then say it about me, like I'll serve myself up as a performer and, oh, I'm just an idiot. And actually I'm far from it. I'm throwing myself under the bus so that person doesn't have to. So I found out I'm a generator. I help regulate the weather in any room that I'm in because that helps keep me safe. I reach out first because then I know that I've done the reaching. No one has to reach for me. And so this whole next part of, the business and life and love is understanding those patterns and being able to put boundaries in, building a team that I'm able to lead properly with kindness, which includes holding accountability instead of being nice, which means dusting under the carpet and mopping up after, which is what I was doing. I was exhausting myself. So really being kind and not nice in this next phase. We're growing into the US. We've got, investors are looking at us now. It has just been, and that was in this tower moment, standing back and going, I'm still valid. I'm still a good human being and I'm allowed to ask for help. Here's the pattern again. I'm allowed to receive. I'm allowed to acknowledge that I'm a good and kind and nice and intelligent person. And sometimes we need reminding. And every time I find myself in the embers, they're the things that I have to come back to.
So where literally is the next step for you? What's the next event? What's the next part of the plan?
So the next part of the plan is just next week. I'm over in New York and we've got some wonderful friends over there who we're beginning to sort of curate smaller events over on the East Coast to start with, and then Dallas in November. We've got our UK events. We have two major UK events. One is our arena event, which is in Manchester in March. And then we have our installation at Ideas Fest, which I absolutely love, where we kind of take a flavour of the big festoon and all of its sort of showmanship and edutainment and, teaching people how to be visible and speak about their businesses. We're taking that to Ideas Fest. But what we're doing is we're growing now with real intention, with the right scaffolding, with the right processes, instead of vibes and vision, moving from this kind of founder-led, throwing down the tracks as we go, really within that hyper-cortisol-driven environment, the survival mode that I've, recognized within myself has been my operating system. I have to talk about it in the past tense now, that my survival and my operating system was centered in survival. This next era of my life isn't about surviving. It's about building with grace and compassion for myself and trusting myself now, because I know myself now more than I've ever known myself before. And I think it's only when you can sit with your patterns and you can sit and have conversations like this where you can recognize it and go, I remember, I get to choose.
Dani, I love the feeling that I'm getting from you now that you're going ahead, acknowledging your own power. I think that's really important, and making sure that other people acknowledge it too, and not playing small or playing nice just to save other people's feelings or not to hurt people in some way, and not to let yourself get hurt. You don't have to worry about that anymore because you are there. Your next Phoenix iteration is, bursting into flames. And it's going to be very, very exciting.
Well, do you know what? Knowing that, I don't have to lead by being the court jester. That's not necessary. All of those things are true. Like the showgirl is still there. The costumes are still there. All of the craziness that is Dani Wallace is still there. But the foundations are so much more solid now. It doesn't feel flighty. It doesn't feel like, those things aren't a cop-out for me anymore. Those things are just part of everything that I am, and everything that I am is absolutely valid. And I think this era is really about that, really planted firmly on the floor, knowing. And I think it's easier to move forward when you know than it is when you're just panicking. Panicking and moving forward. That frenetic energy will eventually burn itself out. So one foot steadily in front of the other, and absolutely trusting there's not a world in which what I'm building doesn't happen. So now that I can let go of that, I can get on with actually doing it properly.
Yeah, it sounds like the foundations are really, really solid now. So, and you've acknowledged them. I think that's the point, really. Not that they weren't there before, but you've acknowledged that they're there, and you are going to work with them and go forward like that. Dani, if there is somebody out there listening who's on the verge of needing to change, or life is forcing change on them, or they just know that where they are is not right for them right now, what is your one piece of advice for them?
My one piece of advice would be, and this is going to feel really counterintuitive, if you're listening to this right now and that's where you are, you're going to want to be really busy. Every bone in your body is going to want to distract yourself from the fact that you might need to make a brave decision, that you need to really throw all of the sticks on the floor and look at them. Sitting with the mirror is one of the most difficult things we can do as human beings. You know, we are in a society whereby it's easier to run from what we feel. And if what we're feeling is despondent and resentment and sadness and fear, and you're not feeling that thing all the way through to the end and sat with it and you're running away from it, you're going to burn out sooner. So the counterintuitive thing is to stop and understand sometimes that change needs space, and space is painful sometimes because we think, oh, the whole thing's going to fall down around me if I stop. And what happens is if you don't take that time, life will find out a way of making you stop, or you're going to waste time, precious moments, days, months, years of your life feeling the exact opposite of the reason we're put on this earth for, which is to feel joy and to connect and to, you know, live within our purpose, whatever that is. If you don't allow yourself to get quiet with it and stop, you're not going to find it. And so you're just going to keep pushing, and anything that you are chasing is going to run away from you. And so it's counterintuitive. Pause, stop, give yourself some space. And that space is magic. It's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel nice, but there's a difference between nice and kind, right? There's a difference between nice and making moves that are going to, on the other side of it, we're often really scared of the great things on the other side of it because we haven't experienced them. So if you're able to hold on and let go at the same time, it's petrifying, but the most freeing thing you can do. And I always come back to the, you know, in the film The Hangover, and the guy at the end goes, "Did you die? As long as you're not dead, we're still going. Let's go."
Dani, thank you so much for sharing your reinvention stories, your life story with us. Your insights are extraordinary, and your progress and your trajectory is just wonderful. So thank you.
Lucy, thank you for having me. It is always a joy.
Thank you, Dani Wallace, for your openness and honesty in sharing your internal and external journey from a difficult childhood to becoming the queen bee of your own hive and community. Genuinely, I can't wait to see what happens next. For more inspiring reinvention stories, follow and subscribe now to the Phoenix Conversations on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or maybe all three. You can connect with me on most social media platforms as long as you can spell my name. I am the only Lucy McCarraher on the internet, and I'd love to hear your reinvention story. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.